They said the law was dead, until a stranger pinned the badge at dawn. The badge lay in the dust like a fallen star, its tin surface dulled by 3 weeks of desert wind and the blood of the man who'd died wearing it. Cole Mackenzie's horse stepped around it careful-like, as if even the animal knew that some things carried more weight than their size suggested. The stranger dismounted slow, his boots hitting the packed earth with the sound of finality. Broken Creek stretched before him like a wound that wouldn't heal. Boarded windows stared blind from buildings that had once housed dreams. The saloon doors hung crooked on their hinges, and tumbleweeds gathered in the corners where children should have played. This wasn't a town anymore. It was a graveyard with a few stubborn souls too poor or too proud to leave. From the shadows of the general store, eyes watched him. Frightened eyes. Hopeful eyes. Eyes that had seen too much dying and not enough justice. The Valdez gang owned this place now, had claimed it like wolves claiming a carcass, and decent folk had learned to make themselves small when predators prowled. Cole knelt and picked up the badge, feeling its familiar weight settle in his palm like an old friend coming home. Sheriff Thomas Donovan, according to the name scratched into the back. 3 weeks in the dirt, but the metal still held warmth from the morning sun. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, its bronze voice echoing off empty buildings, like a prayer nobody expected God to answer. "Mister, you best drop that and ride on." The voice came from the saloon's broken doorway, soft and accented with the music of old Mexico. A woman stepped into the light, her dark hair pinned back severe, her dress the color of mourning. She moved like someone who'd learned to be careful, to watch corners and listen for footsteps that might bring trouble. Cole stood, brushing dust from his knees, the badge still warm in his fingers. "This belonged to a friend of yours?" Her laugh came sharp and bitter. "Friend, lover, dead man, take your pick." She studied Cole's face like she was reading a book written in a language she almost understood. Tom Donovan thought a badge made him bulletproof. Turned out it just made him a better target. The stranger's eyes held depths that spoke of winters spent alone and summers that burned too hot. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his gun belt oiled and ready. Something in the way he carried himself suggested a man who'd worn authority before, who understood the weight of other people's lives resting on his decisions. Valdez kill him. Ramon Valdez put 3 bullets in Tom's back while he was checking on Mrs. Patterson's store. The woman's voice carried pain like a scar that wouldn't fade. Then he pinned a note to the courthouse door, saying this town didn't need law anymore. Said the Valdez brothers were law enough for anybody. A door slammed somewhere down the street, followed by the sound of running feet. Cole turned to see a boy, maybe 12 years old, racing toward them with panic written across his face in letters 10 feet tall. "Miss Santos." The boy's voice cracked with fear. "They're coming." Miguel Valdez and 4 others, riding in from the North Road. The woman, Santos, grabbed the boy's shoulders, her knuckles white against his shirt. "Where's your mama, Cisco?" "Hiding in the root cellar, like you told her." The boy's eyes found Cole, took in the badge still gleaming in the stranger's hand. "Mister, you best run. Miguel, he likes killing. Likes it more than breathing." Cole looked down at the tin star, remembering another badge, another town, another time when running would have been the smart choice. 3 years he'd carried the shame of Cedar Ridge. 3 years of empty bottles and empty roads, trying to forget the faces of people who trusted him to stand when standing got hard. "How many Valdez brothers?" Cole asked, his voice steady as river stone. Santos stared at him like he'd just sprouted wings. 4. Ramon's the oldest, runs things. Miguel's the killer. Carlos handles the money. And Luis. She paused, something flickering behind her eyes. Luis is mean in ways that don't have names. The sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls, growing closer like thunder before a storm. 5 riders, just like the boy said, their horses kicking up dust clouds that painted the horizon brown. Cole could make out Miguel Valdez in the lead, a man built like a grizzly bear with eyes that held all the mercy of a winter blizzard. Cole pinned the badge to his vest, the tin catching sunlight and throwing it back like a challenge. The metal felt heavier now, weighted with promise and threat in equal measure. Behind him, Santos sucked in her breath sharp enough to cut glass. "You're making a mistake, stranger," she whispered. "That badge is just tin. Won't stop bullets, won't stop men like the Valdez brothers. Won't stop anything but your heart when they put you in the ground next to Tom." Cole checked his Colt, making sure the cylinder spun clean. 6 shots, 5 riders. The math wasn't complicated, but math had a way of changing when leads started flying. "Maybe," he said, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "But some mistakes are worth making." The riders came like Judgment Day, dust devils swirling in their wake and death riding easy in their saddles. Miguel Valdez sat his horse like he owned the world, his sombrero tilted back to show a face scarred by knife fights and marked by cruelty. Behind him, for men with guns and grins, their eyes holding the flat emptiness of rattlesnakes coiled to strike. Cole stepped into the middle of the street, his boots clicking against the hardpan earth like a clock counting down to midnight. The badge on his chest caught the sun and threw it back, a small defiance against the shadow that had fallen over Broken Creek. Behind him, he could hear Santos herding young Cisco toward safety, her whispered prayers mixing with the sound of shutters slamming closed all along the street. Cedar Ridge. The name hit him like a fist to the gut, bringing with it the taste of whiskey and the smell of smoke. Another town, another badge, another time when people had looked at him with hope in their eyes and trust in their hearts. He'd failed them then, let politics and compromise poison the well of justice until good folks died and bad ones prospered. Miguel Valdez raised his hand, and the riders stopped 20 paces out. Close enough to talk. Close enough to kill. The big man's smile revealed teeth like broken tombstones, and his voice carried the lazy confidence of a predator who'd never met anything he couldn't destroy. "Well, well. Looks like Broken Creek found itself another sheriff." Miguel's laugh sounded like gravel in a tin bucket. "You know what happened to the last one, senor? He got 3 bullets in the back for his trouble. Real quiet like. Real permanent." Cole's hand rested easy near his gun, but his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. 5 against 1. Those weren't fighting odds. Those were dying odds. But sometimes a man had to choose his ground, even when the ground chose him back. "I heard." Cole's voice carried steady across the distance between them. "Heard you boys like shooting folks in the back. Heard you call yourselves law in these parts." The riders stirred like wasps in a shaken hive, hands drifting toward gun butts, eyes narrowing to slits. Miguel's smile faded, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "The only law here is what we say it is, stranger. And we say this town don't need another dead sheriff cluttering up the street." Behind Cole, a door creaked open just enough for frightened eyes to peer out. "Mrs. Patterson from the general store, probably, or old Doc Henley, who'd stitched up half the territory in his day. Good people. Decent people. People who deserved better than wolves in human clothing." In Cedar Ridge, he'd been young Sheriff Cole Mackenzie, full of fire and righteousness and the absolute certainty that justice would prevail if good men stood their ground. He'd learned different when Mayor Garrett and the city council sold him out to the Sinclair mining interests. Learned that sometimes the law was just words on paper, and words burned easy when the price was right. "See, the thing is," Cole said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years' worth of regret, "I've been running from this badge for longer than I care to remember. Running from what it means, what it costs, what it asks of a man." Miguel shifted in his saddle, his gun hand twitching like he was calculating distances and angles. "You talk too much, senor. Time for talking's over." "Maybe." Cole took a step forward, closing the gap between them by 2 feet. That felt like 2 miles. "But I've got one more thing to say before the shooting starts." The street held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for words that would either save a town or bury it under boot heels and gun smoke. Cole could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the sweat on his horse and the fear leaking out of the buildings like poison gas. In Cedar Ridge, I let political men and money men convince me that compromise was better than conflict. Let them tell me that half a loaf was better than none, that justice delayed was better than justice denied. Cole's voice grew harder with each word, like steel being forged in fire. "I watched good people suffer because I chose the easy path over the right one." Miguel's patience snapped like a dry twig. His hand dropped toward his gun, but Cole's voice stopped him cold. "But here's what I learned in 3 years of running, Valdez. A badge isn't just tin. It's a promise. A promise that somewhere in this sorry world, someone's willing to stand between the wolves and the sheep. Someone's willing to say no when yes would be easier." The Colt cleared leather smooth as silk, its barrel finding Miguel Valdez like a compass needle finding north. The other 4 men reached for their weapons, but Cole's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "First man draws iron, Miguel dies. That's not a threat, boys. That's arithmetic." The standoff stretched tight as a bowstring. 5 men with murder in their hearts, facing 1 man, with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Behind Cole, Santos's voice carried soft as a prayer. "Holy Mother of God, what are you doing?" What was he doing? Cole asked himself the same question as sweat ran down his spine and fear tasted like copper pennies on his tongue. He was keeping a promise he'd made to himself in the dark hours after Cedar Ridge burned. A promise that next time, he'd stand when standing mattered. Next time, he'd be the man the badge required him to be. Miguel's eyes held calculation, now, instead of amusement. 5 against 1, but the one had his gun already drawn and aimed at the leader's heart. Change the arithmetic, change the outcome. You're bluffing, gringo. Nobody's that fast. Cole smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Want to find out? The standoff broke like a fever when Miguel Valdez spat in the dust and yanked his horse's reins hard to the left. "This ain't over, Sheriff. Not by a long shot." The 5 riders wheeled and galloped back toward the canyon, their curses and threats echoing off the rock walls like the howling of demons retreating to hell. Cole kept his gun drawn until the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded to memory. Only then did he holster the Colt, his hands shaking just enough to remind him he was still human. Behind him, doors creaked open and frightened faces peered out like prairie dogs checking for hawks. Maria Santos stepped into the street, her dark eyes holding something between admiration and fury. "You just signed this town's death warrant, Sheriff." Miguel doesn't forget. Miguel doesn't forgive. Maybe. Cole touched the badge on his chest, feeling its weight settle deeper into his bones. But sometimes a man's got to take a stand, even when the ground's shifting under his feet. The saloon's interior smelled of whiskey and lost dreams, its tables scarred by years of card games and knife fights. Santos moved behind the bar with practiced efficiency, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid that caught the lamplight like liquid gold. Cole accepted the drink, but didn't touch it to his lips, watching as she downed hers in a single gulp. "Tell me about Sheriff Donovan," Cole said, his voice gentle as evening rain. "Tell me why he mattered enough to die for this place." Santos laughed, but the sound held no humor. Tom was a fool. A beautiful, stubborn fool who believed in right and wrong like they were carved in stone instead of written in sand. She poured herself another drink, this one disappearing as quickly as the first. "He came here 6 months ago, said Broken Creek deserved better than living under the boot of outlaws and thieves." Through the saloon's grimy windows, Cole could see the townspeople emerging from their hiding places. Old men with bent backs and women with worry lines carved deep as creek beds. Children who'd learned to be quiet, to make themselves small when trouble came calling. What happened the night he died? Santos's knuckles went white around her glass. Tom had been tracking the Valdez gang's money trail. Found out they'd been taking protection money from every business in 3 counties, bleeding folks dry while pretending to keep them safe. Her voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. He found something else too. Something that got him killed. The church bell tolled midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the empty streets like a warning. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with the sound of wild things calling to their own kind. What did he find, Maria? She looked at Cole with eyes that held depths he couldn't fathom. Pain layered upon pain like sediment in a riverbed. The Valdez brothers weren't just taking protection money. They were taking land, forcing folks off their claims, burning out homesteaders, running cattle ranchers into bankruptcy. All legal-like, through shell companies and corrupt judges. Cole felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind like bullets sliding into a chamber. Someone was backing them. Someone with money and connections. Judge Harrison from the territorial capital. Senator Blackwood from back east. Maybe others. Santos refilled both their glasses, her hand steadier now. Tom had proof. Documents, witness statements, enough evidence to bring down the whole network. Where's the proof now? Santos smiled, but it was a sad, broken thing. Burned with Tom's office. Or so they think. She walked to the back wall of the saloon, running her fingers along the rough planking until she found what she was looking for. A board shifted, revealing a hidden space behind the wall. From the cavity, she withdrew a leather portfolio tied with string. "Tom gave this to me the day before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should find someone with the backbone to see justice done." She set the portfolio on the bar between them like a loaded gun. "Question is, Sheriff, are you that someone?" Cole opened the portfolio with fingers that trembled despite his will. Inside, documents and photographs told a story of corruption that reached from Broken Creek to Washington itself. Land grants signed by dead men. Mining claims transferred at gunpoint. Testimony from families driven from their homes by men who wore badges but served only greed. Jesus. The word escaped Cole's lips like a prayer or a curse. This is enough to hang half the territorial government. It's enough to get you killed, just like it got Tom killed. Santos leaned across the bar, her face close enough that he could smell the whiskey on her breath and see the fear she tried so hard to hide. "The Valdez brothers are just the sharp end of the stick, Sheriff. Cut off their head, and 2 more will take their place. The real power lives in courthouses and capitol buildings, in places where money talks louder than justice." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the saloon's windows and sending tumbleweeds skittering down the street like ghost dancers. Cole closed the portfolio and looked at Maria Santos, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not just a saloon keeper or a dead man's lover, but a woman who'd carried the weight of terrible knowledge for 3 weeks, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to pick up where Tom Donovan left off. "Why didn't you take this to the federal marshals?" Why wait for a stranger to pin on a badge? Santos's laugh came bitter as winter wind. Because Marshal Thompson gets his orders from Judge Harrison. Because the federal men are bought and paid for just like everyone else. She touched Cole's hand, her fingers warm against his skin. Tom believed in you, even before he met you. What do you mean? He said someday a man would come to Broken Creek. A man running from his past, but still carrying his honor. A man who'd stand when standing cost everything. Santos's eyes held firelight and shadow in equal measure. Tom said when that man came, I'd know him by the way he picked up a badge nobody else wanted to wear. The church bell tolled 1 o'clock, then fell silent. Cole looked down at the portfolio, at the evidence that could save a territory or bury them all. In Cedar Ridge, he'd chosen compromise over conflict, politics over principle. The choice had haunted him for 3 years, driven him to empty bottles and emptier roads. But here in Broken Creek, with Maria Santos watching him with eyes that held both hope and fear, Cole Mackenzie faced the same choice again. Run or stand. Compromise or fight. Live with honor or die with it. Through the window, he could see the courthouse where Tom Donovan's badge had waited in the dust for someone fool enough to pick it up. Tomorrow, the Valdez brothers would come again, and this time they'd bring enough guns to paint the streets red. Cole tied the portfolio's strings and tucked it inside his coat, feeling its weight settle against his ribs, like armor made of words and witness. Tom Donovan was right about one thing, Maria. This town deserves better than wolves in sheep's clothing. And you're going to give it to them? Cole stood, checking his gun one more time before stepping toward the door. I'm going to try. Sometimes that's all a man can do. Behind him, Maria Santos whispered a prayer in Spanish, her words carrying on the desert wind like smoke from a dying fire. Dawn came to Broken Creek, like a blade drawn across the throat of night, painting the eastern sky the color of blood and promise. Cole stood in the courthouse doorway, Tom Donovan's badge catching the first light and throwing it back like a challenge to the gathering darkness. The portfolio lay secure in the building's safe, its secrets locked away until justice could speak with a louder voice than corruption. They came with the sun, riding out of the canyon like the 4 horsemen of some desert apocalypse. The Valdez brothers in full force this time, with a dozen hired guns, flanking them like wolves around their pack leaders. Ramon Valdez rode point, his silver-trimmed saddle gleaming, and his face, set in lines that spoke of blood and finality. Behind him, Miguel's scarred visage promised pain, while Carlos counted costs and bullets, and Luis smiled like a man who enjoyed his work too much. Maria Santos emerged from the saloon with a shotgun cradled in her arms, like a sleeping child. She'd traded her morning dress for practical clothes, her dark hair braided back, and her eyes, holding the steady calm of someone who'd made peace with dying. Behind her, old Doc Henley appeared with an ancient rifle, followed by Mrs. Patterson from the general store and half a dozen other townspeople who'd found their courage at the bottom of fear's well. Thought I told you to ride on, Sheriff. Ramon's voice carried the lazy confidence of a man who'd never lost a fight that mattered. Thought I made it clear that Broken Creek don't need your kind of law. Cole stepped into the street, his boots clicking against the hardpan like a clock counting down to judgment. The morning air tasted of dust and cordite, of sweat and the metallic tang that came before violence. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll, its bronze voice echoing off empty buildings, like a prayer nobody expected God to answer. Maybe not, Cole replied, his voice carrying steady across the 20 paces that separated life from death. But it's the only kind I know how to give. The hired guns spread out in a line, their faces holding the flat emptiness of men who killed for wages and slept sound afterward. 13 against 7. Bad odds made worse by the fact that most of Cole's allies had never fired a shot in anger. But sometimes courage mattered more than skill, and sometimes justice required more than mathematics. You got one last chance to walk away from this, Gringo. Miguel's hand rested easy on his gun, but his eyes held the eager anticipation of a man who loved killing more than breathing. One last chance to save yourself and these poor pendejadas who think you can protect them. Maria Santos stepped up beside Cole, her shotgun held steady as church doctrine. This is our town, Miguel. Our home. You want it. You'll have to take it over our bodies. Luis Valdez laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. That can be arranged, puta. The insult hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Cole felt something cold and final settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd carried at Cedar Ridge when compromise died and conflict became inevitable. But this time was different. This time he stood with people who believed in him, who trusted him to hold the line when holding meant everything. Ramon, Cole called out, his voice cutting through the morning stillness. You know what your problem is. You think power comes from the barrel of a gun. Think it comes from making people afraid. The older Valdez brother shifted in his saddle, his face darkening like storm clouds building on the horizon. Power comes from taking what you want and keeping it, Sheriff. Everything else is just words. Maybe. But here's what I learned in 3 years of running from myself. Cole's hand moved to rest on his gun, but the leather warm under his palm. Real power comes from standing for something bigger than yourself. Comes from being willing to die for people who can't protect themselves. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring. 13 men with murder in their hearts facing 7 souls who'd found something worth dying for. Behind Cole, he could hear Mrs. Patterson whispering the Lord's Prayer, her words mixing with the wind that carried dust and the scent of mesquite across the desert floor. Enough talk. Ramon's patience snapped like a dry branch. Kill them all. The street exploded into chaos and gunsmoke. Cole's Colt cleared leather smooth as silk, his first shot taking Miguel center mass and spinning the big man from his saddle. Maria's shotgun boomed like thunder, its double load of buckshot cutting down 2 hired guns before they could draw. Bullets whined through the air like angry hornets. Doc Henley grunted and staggered, blood spreading across his shirt, but kept working his ancient rifle with hands steadier than a surgeon's. Mrs. Patterson's first shot went wide, but her second found its mark, dropping a gunman who'd thought an old woman was easy prey. Cole rolled behind a water trough, splinters flying from the wooden edge as bullets chewed the morning air. Through the gun smoke, he could see Ramon Valdez charging on horseback, his gun blazing and his face twisted with rage. Time slowed like honey in winter, each heartbeat stretching into eternity. The portfolio. Tom Donovan's evidence. If Cole died here, if they all died here, the corruption would continue. Families would lose their land. Good people would suffer while evil men counted their profits in blood money and stolen dreams. Cole rose from behind the trough, his gun steady as a rock despite the bullets singing past his ears. Ramon saw him coming, swung his pistol around, but Cole was already firing. 1 shot. 2. 3. The gang leader pitched backward from his saddle, his horse screaming and rearing as its rider's blood painted the morning earth. The gunfight lasted less than 3 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. When the smoke cleared and the echoes faded, 7 of the 13 attackers lay still in the dust. The survivors, Carlos and Luis among them, limped toward their horses, with their arrogance shot full of holes. This ain't over. Carlos shouted as they retreated toward the canyon. You killed our brother. We'll be back. Maybe, Cole called after them, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. But when you come, You'll face a town that knows how to fight for itself. Maria Santos stood beside him, her shotgun smoking and her face streaked with powder burns. Around them, the surviving townspeople began to emerge from cover, their faces showing the hollow shock that came after violence. Doc Henley sat propped against a wall, his shoulder bloody, but his eyes bright with the fierce satisfaction of a man who'd stood when standing mattered. "Is it over?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Cole looked down at Tom Donovan's badge, its tin surface now dulled with gun smoke and spattered with the blood of men who'd died for other people's greed. "No, ma'am. It's just beginning. We've got evidence to present, trials to hold, justice to serve. Real justice, not the kind that comes from the end of a rope." The sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows of night and painting Broken Creek in shades of gold and hope. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, carrying with it the promise of federal marshals and newspaper reporters, of judges who couldn't be bought and juries who'd never heard of the Valdez gang. Maria Santos slipped her hand into Cole's, her fingers warm and strong. "Tom would be proud," she said softly. "He always said this town was worth saving." Cole looked out at the street where good people had stood and fought and bled for something bigger than themselves, where courage had worn a widow's dress and spoken with an old doctor's steady hands, where justice had come not from the barrel of a gun, but from the willingness of ordinary folks to stand against extraordinary evil. "Yeah," he said, feeling the badge's weight settle deeper into his bones. "I think he was right." The church bell tolled the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the desert like a prayer that God had finally decided to answer.